Welcome to this meeting of the Highways and Transport Overview and Scrutiny Committee, which is taking place in the Sparkino Committee Room at County Hall, Glenfield. There are some officers will be joining online via Microsoft Teams. This meeting is being webcast, so please turn your microphones on when speaking and turn them off when you have finished. We have one substitute today. Mr. Smith is here substituting for Keith Merry. We also have Cabinet Lead Member for Highways and Transport, Mr. Ozzy O'Shea, joining us online. Good afternoon, Ozzy, and welcome to the meeting.
Good afternoon, Tony. Thank you.
So item 1 of the agenda, minutes of the meeting held on the 9th of June 22. I propose that the minutes of the meeting held on the 9th of June 22 are taken as read, confirmed and signed. Agreed? Thank you. Item 2, question time. We have received no questions from the public. 3, questions asked by members under Standing Orders 7.3, 7.5. We have received no questions from members. Item 4, to advise on any other items which the Chairman has decided to take as urgent elsewhere on the agenda. There are no urgent items. 5, declarations of interest in respect of items on the agenda. Do any members have any interest to declare? None. Thank you. 6, declaration of party whip in accordance with Overview and Scrutiny Procedure Rule 16. Are there any declarations of the party whip? Not that I'm aware of. 7, presentation of petition under Standing Order 35. I have not received any petitions. Now we come on to the main meat of the agenda. So it's item 8, Street Lighting Service Review 21-22. Anne Crothers, Director of Environment and Transport, and Chris Waterfield, Team Manager for Structures and Assets, will be presenting this report. So over to you, Anne.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good afternoon, Committee. I'll just very briefly introduce the report, if that's all right, and then hand over to my colleague, Chris Waterfield. Before you in this report is a summary of our service review we carried out in street lighting in 2020-21 financial year. Firstly, I just want to start by reminding members that there's no legal duty for a highway authority to provide street lighting. We have a power to do so if we wish. I think often, that's a bit of a misperception there among the public that, we have to provide it. We don't actually. Having said that, when we do provide it, we have a duty to maintain it, which, I think would quite logical and we'd all agree with, which is what we do. And this report will go through that. So just as part of the wider context, we have just over 69,000 lighting columns across the county, and just over half of those, I think it's 56%, are under our park night lighting regime. The only other thing I will highlight is over recent years, since about 2015, we had roughly a 3-year programme of changing our stock over to LED lighting, and that's completed now, and that's far more energy efficient for us, meaning less cost and less carbon emissions. So that's been a really good news story. However, I'm not going to steal his thunder. I'm going to hand over to my colleague Chris Waterfield, who will talk you through the report. Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, thank you, Anne. Thanks, everybody. Hopefully you've all got a copy of the report in front of you. I probably don't propose to go through too much of the first page because probably the interesting bits are really around the challenges and some of the successes we've achieved in that last financial year. So if I can direct you towards paragraph 12, and if we start there, if we could. On those next few paragraphs, I pick out some of the main challenges that we've got. The first one in paragraph 12 talks about the number of life expired columns that we have in the county. Anne's touched on the total number of columns that we've got. We identified back in April 2020, there's about 16,000 lighting columns that were over 30 years old, which represented about 23% of our lighting stock at the time. Bearing in mind that a street lighting column has a design life of about 25 years, they're significantly over their time for renewal potentially. That doesn't necessarily mean they're going to fail after 25 years, but it's a time when we need to be looking at them. In the next paragraph, I talk about how we manage those assets. particularly the high risk ones. We have a program of structural testing whereby we go out and test them in sequence around the county. Off the back of that, we get a certified period of retest when we must go back again and retest them after they've been done. So that gives us a forward program to look at these columns to see where we think they might be going in terms of their performance. Along with that, then we do undertake reactive maintenance when we find there's problems on these columns, and obviously we try to seek appropriate renewal funding to try and replace these columns, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on in terms of some of the successes that we've had. On paragraph 14 now, I talk about the issue around the ageing network of buried electrical cables. Most of the cables that are in the county are generally provided by the distribution network operator, the DNO, but there's an increasing amount of what we call private cable, which is the cable that's owned by the authority. Most of this cable is old, it's been laid directly in the ground, whereas the modern day function is to put it inside a duct to protect it. And the cable doesn't only supply the street lighting assets, but it also supplies the other assets, the illuminated signs, variable message signs, bollards, those type of things that are there. And we're finding there's an ever-increasing incidence of these cables suffering faults. And you go back a certain number of times to expose where the fault is and do jointing operations. But what we find is once a cable starts to go because it's been laid in the ground, what happens is it becomes uneconomical to keep going back and repairing the same length of cable just 3 meters down the road, 5 meters down the road. It gets to be uneconomical. So we manage this process by undertaking a process of electrical testing every 6 years. So that's all assets are electrically tested to make sure they're safe. We do our reactive maintenance again, and we also seek renewal funding again, which I'll touch on later on if that's okay. Paragraph 16 touches on the assets that we have in our electrical inventory, if you like. So Anne spoke about the number of columns, and she's right to say there's about 56% of part night lit. Just for reference, the ones that are all night lit tend to be on spine roads, main distributor roads, at junctions in housing estates, and then at areas where there's conflicts or potential conflicts, say in traffic calmed areas and things like that, areas where we need to leave the lights on by the design standards, whereas everything else we can change to part night lighting. And you'll probably be aware we turn the lights off at midnight and put them back on at 5:30 in the morning. And then there's a list there of other signs, of other illuminated assets that we have to manage as part of our day-to-day business. The next 9 paragraphs sort of talk about some of the things that we reviewed in the last financial year, 2021 to 22. And if I could start with the Investor Save initiative we had for the dimming of residential streetlights. This was a review of all of our residential lights to see whether we had them at the correct power setting and the right dimming levels for the flows of traffic in that area. So what happens is as the traffic levels drop during the day, during the night, should I say, you're allowed to dim the lights down to a low level. So we engaged an agency staff member to come and help us on this. It cost us about £29,000 to do that work. It took about 10 months for this fella to complete the work, which was excellent. And off the back of that, we've identified the savings that we've made there in 3 areas, really. The cash saving of about £84,000 a year in a full year, this is. The energy of about 495,000 kilowatt hours. And importantly, the carbon dioxide saving of about 105 tonnes. So that's a really good example of where an Investor Save initiative it reaps rewards in perpetuity for us, which is really good news. We've also received no adverse public comment from the changes that were made to those assets over the time. The next 3 paragraphs, and it's got a little graph in there, we talk about the effects of the LED conversion, the part night lighting and the dimming on our carbon production. Paragraph 21 gives some information about where we used to be before we went down this route of modernising our electrical supplies. Back in 2012-13, carbon emissions were 14,500 tonnes. And last year, 21-22, off the back of all the work we've done around the LED conversion, the part night lighting and the dimming that we've done, we're down to around 2,000 tonnes now, which is a pretty impressive reduction, I think you'll know. The table actually shows you, we couldn't get the table to go back to 2012-13, but it does start at 15-16. which is the highest of the columns, and those little columns that you see there for each given month, that's the subsequent years. So you can see year on year how we've made efforts to bring down the amount of carbon that we use. The biggest months probably between October and February. You can see where the biggest carbon emissions were produced when the lights were obviously on for longest and brightest. And we've made some significant changes there, as you can see, over time. One thing I should note there is that there's a conversion factor between the energy that we use and the carbon emissions that are produced. The more green energy we use from the network, the lower the conversion figure is. So there is some actual benefit there within the graph around the use of more green energy, which I think is evident there in some of the numbers. But most of that is to do with the reduction in energy that we're using, which sort of takes us on to the second graph. Again, we're talking about LED conversion, park night lighting and dimming, now just focusing in on the energy. So looking at that same period of 2012-13 to 2021-22, our original energy use was about 27 million kilowatt hours. And after we'd put all our changes into place, we're down to about 8.8 million kilowatt hours now. And again, that's demonstrated in the graph. So you can see there the energy that we're using, how it's dropped from the early bars for each month, which represent 2015-16, through to the most recent ones, which were at the end of the 2021-22 year. Where you see those graphs slightly going up there, we think that's probably to do with the fact we've had a lot of new assets adopted. So as you can imagine, that the housing market's quite buoyant out there. More houses are being adopted when they come to the end of their construction periods. And so the more assets we have, clearly the more energy we use. And that's being slightly reflected in the graph going slightly the wrong way, but it's to be expected as the world changes in terms of the number of assets that we hold. The next set of paragraphs, we talk about safety. One of the things that we get requests for is from the police to help them with their operational activities, usually to do with a local crime spike or some antisocial behaviour, maybe around a parade of shops or those type of things. In that year that we're talking about, 21-22, we undertook 16 trials for the police when they came to us and said, will we mind turning the lights back on to all night lighting, so that they could then undo their operational activities, whether that means more beat patrols, whatever that was, I'm not entirely clear. But of the 13, this is as of April, when we finished the report, as of April, we'd finished 13 of those trials, and 12 of those trials were returned back to park night lighting once the police had completed their activities. I think the only one that remained, I think, was in Thurmaston from memory. There was a number of lights that everybody believed it would be better to leave those on because of an ongoing issue there. And then the second area of safety where we can assist is when we've got our operational gangs on the roads having to do nighttime working because of the accessibility to the highway. Many patching gangs and things have to work out at night on some of the sensitive junctions and things. And so we can turn the lights on overnight, leave them on to allow the guys to be working in as much light as possible, which means that there's less slip trip hazards and they can do their work a lot more safely. So that's another way where we can use our systems to help with safety across the network. Probably what I should say is all of the street lights that we have now are managed by a central management system. And that management system allows each column to self-report faults, which is great. We don't need a scouts to go out to keep an eye on these things. But it also gives us that opportunity to trim and dim, to turn them on, turn them off as and when we require. And it's all managed through a computer system here at County Hall. So that gives us great flexibility, which is shown really in those safety sections there. I'll then go on to talk about some of the projects that we've done using capital money, two in particular, over the last couple of years or so. In particular, the Foss Park, Grove Park triangle works, where we've been looking at all the assets in that area, which is a vital, busy interchange, as probably most of you will know. I don't know if anybody are from the particular area, but all of that area is pretty busy. The lights around Foss Park Island in particular, that's the one that comes from the motorway across the island in towards Asda at that top end. A lot of those lights were put in 1980 when that island was rejigged. And at the time, the industry wasn't using what we call internal protection, a coating system within the columns to protect them from internal corrosion. I think it took them a few years to realise that was a mistake, and they went back to actually coating them on the inside. But by which point we've identified these columns, they're corroded from the inside, and it's quite difficult to see from the outside how badly what sort of bad condition they're in. So we managed to achieve some additional funding of £500,000 as part of a 3-year programme to look at these assets. We've been split the job into 12 zones, and we've cracked on with that. So in the last financial year, we replaced 78 columns, 6 feeder pillars, which are the little boxes you see, the grey boxes you see by the side of the road that have all the electrical connections in there, and replaced about 8,000 metres of cable, putting all that into ducts to protect it, to give it extra life. And so that was the work we completed last year. The work's continuing this year. We hope to complete probably 10 or 11 of those zones by the end of this year, and then we'll have some mop-up work to do hopefully next year should the funding come along. So by the time we finish there, all of that Foss Park network, going right way down to the police station. If you can picture where, if you head south from Foss Park, you get to the new Everard's place going south to the police station and the garden centre down there. Replaced an awful lot of columns and assets in the whole area through there. So we're making the whole area a lot more resilient. The other area of projects that we've had some serious capital money given to us for is the column replacement programme. We identified, out of those 16,000 columns that we identified as being over 30 years old, we identified about 11,300 that we thought were probably at risk. They were greater than 40 years old, and we were concerned about the condition of those particular lights. So we put a business case together, secure the necessary funding to go and tackle that. And we're using an evidence-based process to sort out which columns we're replacing as and when. Some of that is based on the column testing results that we've had back from the structural testing. Some of it is based around the age of these assets that we've got. So we got £1.5 million in the last financial year, which allowed us to replace about 1,300 at-risk assets. We've got another £1.3 million, should I say, this year to continue that process. We'll do a similar sort of number, although the cost of the raw materials, etc., is increasing. So we'll have to see how that number finally pans out. So we are trying to make inroads into those number of ageing columns. Now, paragraphs 40 and 41 talk about income generation. You'll be aware of the pressures of the MTF on us all in terms of the savings we need to make, but clearly there's another arm to this, which is around if you can increase your income generation, that will help to offset some of the savings that we've got to make. So using our specialist skills for the street lighting design team, we're generating more and more external income. We get offers from developers to do their street lighting designs. The advantage we've got is that we're a one-stop shop, essentially. What we do is we can provide a design. We have to do the technical check anyway. That's part of our function here at the county. So if they go to an external designer, they have to come to us to check anyway, and then there's often faults with that, and you end up with this circular ping pong of it's not right, get a redesign sorted out, etc. So I think developers are understanding that our one-stop shop of doing a design right first time that's going to be fully compliant with LCC's requirement gives them some confidence about the work we're going to deliver for them. So last year we submitted 22 quotations for lighting design. 17 of those at the time of writing the report had been determined, and we won all 17 of those. 5 were yet to be determined. Sometimes we put prices in well before these jobs get anywhere near the ground. So of those 17 successful quotations that we had, we generated design fees now of about £42,000. So that goes some ways towards the MTF savings overall that we have to make. So we're contributing there. The knock-on effect, of course, is when we do the designs, we have the opportunity to provide the developer with a quotation for doing the works out on site using our own experienced in-house operational teams. And that's starting to pay dividends. Last year, we managed to secure £367,000 worth of work for our operational guys. Now, that's not profit by any means. That's the value of the work. Our return on that will be difficult to say, but probably it's if I was to say 20 to 25%, that would be about right. I would guess something of that. So there's a reasonable amount of income that's coming in from the operational side, which is really good. Again, our one-stop shop where we have to inspect whatever the developer puts in, we have to inspect it anyway. And so developers will come to us because they know whatever we put in will be to the right spec, meeting all the requirements. There's no snagging to be done. It's all done, and they can then move on to get developments to adoption far quicker than if they go to external suppliers. So we're seeing an upward trend in that amount of income generation, which whilst the market stays buoyant, I'm pretty confident that we'll still keep driving that forward. The slight concern is, as you can imagine, with the cost of living issues at the moment, and the rise in interest rates, mortgage interest rates, the like, if we see some slowdown in that market, we may not be able to sustain those sort of levels of income that we're talking about there. But only time will tell on that as we go forward. Now, the next section talks about some of the issues and challenges here, and I've picked out 4 or 5 that we think are key, some of which I've sort of touched on before. The ageing stock is the first one, so we're into paragraph 43. The column replacement programme is addressing a number of these at-risk columns. But of course, as fast as we replace the columns, there's more columns that start out as amber, and they'll be another year old and therefore another year further at risk. So we're up to 11,900 when this report was written. So a slight increase in number. So even though we replaced just over 1,300 columns last year, more than that came back to us rising from the amber into red. So we're chasing a tail a little bit here in terms of trying to keep on top of it. But there's a big issue around that. We don't get. I'm trying to think now. We've never had a column go down, but we have had various brackets and things fall off our columns from time to time, and so it brings the point home how we have to be really careful about how we manage our assets. Some of the typical defects are shown there in those photographs. One's at Markfield, one's at Melton. As you can see, that corrosion is all below ground. And it may sound strange, but often on dog walking routes, we end up with these columns that start to fail before the other ones because of the dogs peeing up against the lamp columns, to put it bluntly. So that's all below ground. They may appear to be quite sound up front, but obviously when the wind blows, it's the bit that's below ground that holds these columns up. And therefore, it's the bit below ground that's the bit we're most concerned about. And these are columns that we were doing some replacement work on. And when we pulled them out, we found the condition that they were in, which sort of highlights the problem for us. I moved on then to talk about rising energy costs. And in the report here, I touched on the increase in the tariff for last year in 21-22. It always goes up in October for us. ESPO, who sort out our tariffs for us, did a cracking job last year. It only went up by 8.6%. I'm not entirely familiar with it. They buy the futures market somehow, and they're buying electricity well in advance. So if you're buying it when it's cheap, then that's great. Obviously, as the prices go up, you're always buying into more expensive prices. So that's going to give us a problem, not a problem necessarily, but it's an inflationary pressure that we've got. And I said there that some of our comparable authorities were talking about having an 80% increase in their tariffs, already being demonstrated last year. Now I can give you an update because yesterday I got some information from ESPO about where they think the price will be this year. They're talking about it being at least 100%. So currently we pay just over 17 pence per kilowatt hour. They say their rate at the moment is estimated to be 35 pence a kilowatt hour. So if you take the current year we're in now, 22-23, our energy bill is about £1.5 million as it stood on the old tariff. When you factor in the change up to at least 35 pence in October, so you sort of get 6 months at one tariff and 6 months at a higher tariff. The bill this year is going to be about 2.56 million, we estimate. So that's $1 million over where we are now. So that's money that has to be found to pay for the lights under inflationary pressure. And then obviously when you look into next year, when we use that same 35 pence per kilowatt hour and use that across the whole piece for next year, as our initial forecast, if you like, that goes up to 3.12 million. So there's some significant changes which we really can't do anything about in terms of where that budget's going to go purely on the energy there. So that's a bit of an update on that. We should get an update, although the tariff comes into play on the 1st of October, we usually get notified about the beginning of November as to what the settled tariff will be for the year, and we can then update our forecasts. And I've written to our finance colleagues just this morning to appraise them where we think the energy costs are going to go to. And it won't come as a surprise to anybody. I've been warning them for a few months now that it's likely to be the case, and obviously it's on the news all the time. But that's the closest estimate we can give at the moment. There's some quite stark figures there in terms of where it would be. But I think if you cast your mind back to where we were before we changed to LED, when we had 3 times the amount of energy that was being used, I think we've moved from 28 million, just under 28 million kilowatts down to just under 9 million kilowatts now. So if we hadn't have made that investment in the LEDs and the dimming and trimming that we've managed to do, we're talking 3 times that. So the bill for this year would be £7.5 million rather than £2.5 million. So that investor save and the money we got from central government and the hard work that everybody's put into there, it's really paying its dividends now that the unforeseen increase in energy costs that weren't envisaged at the time when the project itself was put forward. Moving on to paragraph 46 onwards, we talk about the carbon reduction and some of the issues we've got around that. We've got around 1,400, the old sodium, the old orange lights you might remember, that have been adopted since the LED rollout. These would have been designs that were done on developer estates that were compliant and installed at the time. It then takes a period for them to be adopted. And off the back of that adoption, those lights become LCC's responsibility. So we've got about 1,400 of these lights that we need to find the money to upgrade those to LED equivalents and to switch them onto the attach them to the CMS, the central management system, as I say, which allows us to do the trimming and dimming and automatic fault detection that system gives us. And the second thing around, so until we get to that point, those 1,400 lights are burning more energy and more carbon emissions than we would like. And when we check our asset database and understanding where we are with designs that we know are out there's about another 3,000 assets that are waiting to be adopted. These might be, some of these might be the sodium ones, but they're more likely to be LED designs by now. But they are all new assets that will come to the authority at some point. And that 3,000 assets, when they come, that adds about another 4% to our lighting stock. So that's a 4% increase in energy requirement, 4% increase in carbon emissions generally, and a 4% increase in our maintenance responsibility, because they have to be electrically tested, as I described before, structurally tested as and when that's required, and the day-to-day maintenance you have to do on these things. So carbon reduction is going to be a challenge for us, how quickly we can get those converted and rolled out to a CMS and to LED to start to make sure we're not having an increase in carbon emissions on those assets. In paragraph 48 now, I talk about the issues of worldwide availability for steel columns and rare earth metals for our semiconductors and other components that go into our lighting column assets and various other things. The price of columns has more than doubled in the last 6 months for the steel columns, which sort of replicates what's happening worldwide with steel production. And the business about the rare earth metals is also coming to the fore. I have to say, when I put this in April, we were expecting the situation to be a lot worse, but our suppliers seem to be getting on top of it now. So I'm rather hoping that we're not going to be badly affected by that. But I've left it in there as a flag, because whatever happens out there in the world, we can't control, and the price of steel and the availability of commodities is tricky to understand at the moment. And I put in paragraph 49 about the public perception of our street lighting here in Leicestershire. It got a 54.9% satisfaction level. And I guess people don't understand how well we've done in terms of the efficiency around the carbon and the energy. And so it may prove difficult to change that perception, because if people only see that the lights are turned off earlier and a little bit dimmer, and it doesn't suit everybody, that's the case. I'm not entirely sure what else we can do as an authority or as a team to increase that satisfaction level that's in there. Beyond that, in this report, there's a bit of chat there about resource implications. Probably I'll just point you to paragraph 52, which talks about the funding in the current year. Foss Park and the column replacement programme is about £2 million this year, give or take, and the revenue is about £2.2 million, to give you an idea of the size of the budget that we have for the current year now, looking forward a little bit. And paragraph 53 there really summarises some of the issues that I've set out for you today around the challenges we've got with aging stock and increasing materials costs and the energy issues that are in there. But we're working hard to try and keep those figures down, because we understand the issues, and we're doing our best to try and keep on top of that. So hopefully that gives you a broad understanding of what we did last year, and the work that we're undertaking, some of the challenges, but happy to answer any questions if that's appropriate. I haven't been to one of these before, so I'm not sure how it goes.
Thank you, Chris, for that enlightening report. Yeah, I'm pleased you can stay with us for a while, because I've got Councillor Craig Smith with a question for you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Chris. Great report. Just looking at the costs and obviously the replacement work, the things that you're doing there, would it not be prudent to look at new technologies? In particular, I'm thinking solar and battery technology lamps, so that when we're doing the replacements on the columns and things like that, we can adopt and incorporate these, so that one, it will negate the use for more cabling. Obviously, you've got the Wi-Fi hubs in these, a lot of the car parking things now that they use for the solar and things like that. So I would assume that it would be similar. I don't know if the technology is there or is available, but certainly long term it would make a huge saving, particularly on the energy costs going forward.
Yeah, thanks for the question. You're right on that. The technology is emerging and developing all the time. We looked at doing the potential for some of this a while ago, but this is after the rollout of everything we've spoken about there. And some of that technology is developing nicely, but not really ready there yet for us to think about switching. A lot of the column, you can get wraparound things, what do you call them, photovoltaic systems that go around there to drive lighting columns. But there would have to be another big capital outlay to do that. There are some columns you can get, I think, where the battery technology and the LV, the battery charging is all built into that. So again, you'd be talking about column swaps again, out the current columns out, the new columns in. So it's something we've got an eye on, but I don't think we feel comfortable yet that technology is there ready for us that's going to be reliable. There may be other technical issues that I'm not aware of. I'm not a strict lighting man. I manage the service and I've got a great team working beneath me. And so I think what I'll do is I'll try and find some more information if I could, if that's okay. And I can perhaps drop a note, possibly through Anne, to let you know where that technology is and whether that's an option for us going forward or how soon we might think that might come about. Would that be okay?
Les.
Thank you, Chair. Hi, Chris. The beauty of scrutiny is sometimes it goes well and sometimes it doesn't go quite so well because it's a scrutiny.
Yeah, no problem.
I've got one request, please, and a written response is more than adequate, I think, for the group, and that is when you were talking about using our in-house resources to do the highway works for developers. You commented that you think it's somewhere between 20 and 25% margin. With the greatest respect, think isn't good enough. It needs to be quite clear what that margin is. Otherwise, we don't know how viable it is. So okay, I would like to see a written response where that is absolutely qualified. And as costs are inevitably going to increase, we absolutely need to know what those margins are if we're going to take that work forward. So if you could do that, Chris, that would be brilliant.
Yeah.
And then I think the other one, you mentioned all the lights waiting, or the lighting waiting to be adopted in the system from new developments, and some may be sodium, hopefully most will be LED. Can we not, and I'm kind of going to look towards Anne on this one, can we not make it mandatory that our adoptable standard is that those lighting columns are LED? So thank you, Chris. Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Chair.
Well, I'll just come in at that last point if it's all right, and Chris can correct me if he's got further information. I think what Chris was talking about, there will be historic ones there will have agreed. So because it can take, you know what it's like, they're big developments, it can take 4, 5, 6 more years to build them out. So it's the historic ones. And I think as he said, when they'd done the research, we reckon there's another 3,000 out there coming at us, but those ones are more recent and we're anticipating those will be. So, you know, come a certain point, we would have specified it's got to be LED, but what we're seeing those, I can't remember, was it 1,400, something like that, Chris? Those ones coming through were the kind of earlier ones that were still on the kind of older standards, so they were sodium. So it really is the kind of legacy ones coming through the system.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Anne. Chris, answers the question. Thank you.
Okay.
Chris, did you want to come back?
No. If you're happy with that, I was just going to say at the time when the designs were done and they were installed, they were compliant. It probably wouldn't be right to go back to the developer and say what you did was right at the time, but because it's taken a number of years to get to adoption, you've now got to go back and change those lights. So that's not a matter for me, but that would seem to be a fair reflection of where we are.
Thank you, Mr. Allen.
Thank you very much, Chair. Chris, thank you for your comprehensive report. My question's kind of in a similar vein to Craig's. So in terms of the columns, we've got 11,000 steel columns which we need to replace. Are there not other technologies potentially for the columns either in the pipeline or existing? I mean, some members might be familiar with some of the concrete columns that were put up probably the 70s, which seem to have disappeared. Presumably
Yeah,
they don't
thankfully.
suffer from rotten dogweed quite so much. So equally, there's materials like maybe fiberglass or carbon fibre. Is there potentially anything in the future where, or available now, where we can have columns that will actually sort of stand the time better than steel potentially? Thank you, Chris.
I'll speak to my guys on that in terms of what technology is available. I know you can get aluminium columns. The cost of those, the capital cost, first of all, is a lot more, but they have got a longer life. And so I would imagine, I'm speaking on behalf of the guys now, that there'd have been some sort of view taken on that the cost benefit was better to keep with steel and replace those more frequently than to have the more expensive stainless steel or aluminium varieties. But I can ask that question, certainly.
Amanda?
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of things. In terms of the amount of lighting columns that we've identified as being at risk, just a touch over 11,000, we replaced 1,300 last year. It's going to take an awful long time to do those that are currently at risk. So what's our sort of 10-year, 20-year view in terms of peak years, times at which we're going to have to do lots of replacement, because development, as we all know, goes in sort of fits and starts, and growth, big roads get developed. They get developed. I mean, Narb Road South, for example, will have been built out at a particular time when other things will have been happening. Do we have peak years on the horizon where we're gonna have to do lots and lots of replacement? What's our forward plan for that? The other question on adoption actually is quite interesting. Whilst it's not in my division, it's in my neighbouring division. Thorpasty still has street columns that are yellow lighted, the orange lights that the developers are looking after. They are now replacing all of those because they've been waiting. I don't know if they're due to be adopted, but they are at least 10 years old. Clearly, it would make more sense for them to replace them before adoption. And is there a possibility to start having those conversations with developers, because they're going to have to replace the lights at some point? Maybe that investment for them would be better spent. And I suppose in terms of public perception, it's flat data in here. 53% of the public think it's okay. I don't know what that means in terms of, is that about average? Is that okay? Is the city perform better because they obviously don't have park night lighting in the city? Is there any sort of statistical averages that we could compare with other authorities? Do we have that, and how well are we doing overall?
I think, shall I respond to that? I think we can get that, the NHT figures. I get given it for Leicestershire, but I have a feeling one of our guys in one of the teams has the list of all the counties and perhaps where we come. So we can certainly get the NHT numbers, I'm sure, to you. The issue around developers switching those lights over, I can ask the question, if it's not part of the design guide or policy, which is dealt with by other people, that may be tricky, but it may be a question that's worth asking. And what was the other one? Replacement. The first question, Councillor, was about replacement. About the number and looking, the forward look, isn't it, as to how that goes. I think we've got an understanding of how many columns we've got of a certain age, or in the age brackets, if you like. It doesn't always mean that the oldest are going to fail first, because you could find some that are younger that are in a more sensitive on a street that's gritted, for instance. You get the salt that lays around the column, so they may be more susceptible than a one that's on a quiet lane that's not on a dog walking route that might last you a long while. So it isn't always as straightforward as looking at the time scale. So we have to bear that in mind when we're trying to assess what we can do. And there's no easy answer other than finding money to invest in the replacement. None of us want to be sitting around when one of these things blows over. So it is about convincing the people that hold the purse strings that our service area needs funding to keep these columns in good condition.
Before I bring you back up, I'm just going to bring Anne.
I was just going to add on that last point, if it's all right, to what Chris has said, that forward look, as he said, the service area have, through the regular surveys, got an idea of, one, what the older ones are, and, that number at risk of the between 11 and 12,000 at risk. Now, as you've seen there, actually a reasonable amount of money, 1.5 million, only got us just over 1,000 columns, because you take them out, you put a new one in, the cost of the column, the cost of the work, the electrical connection, etc., etc., goes on. You don't actually get a lot, so it's going to take us a while, isn't it? We are absolutely constrained by the amount of funding. Absolutely, constrained about what we can do. We have a programme, as Chris has set out there, and it's in the report, how much money we've got for capital replacement this year. But again, it's very much on a plateau. So we're looking at, another 1,000, hopefully, if prices don't continue to increase. So we will do what we can with that funding. What Chris and his team, however, do with their survey work is to monitor as much as we can to make sure that we are dealing with the ones that are most at risk without that within that group. So we are dealing with that. But as he says, often it's not your absolutely obvious factors that are driving the at-risk element there. So we do keep a close look at it. I mean, ultimately, if we felt there was a real problem, we could take a column out and not replace it, as an immediate. We've not had to do that, and hopefully we don't get there, because we are getting through that stock. And then, alluding to points that councillors have made earlier, we will be doing that cost benefit assessment about what is the best material, what's the best value against lifespan of a column. So hopefully that number, the 11,000, will come down, although we're doing 1,000, between 1,000 and 2,000 a year, etc., because materials get better and technology does get better over time. So it's a challenging situation, but we have a managed plan for it.
If I can just add to that, we do the structural testing. So there is a regime in place where all these columns go out and they're structurally tested. There's a little mini JCB goes around, it grips it, it puts a load on it, and it produces a result. And then we get a certification to say you don't need to test this one for another few years, whatever that happens to be, 3, 4, 5 years, depending on what results they're getting. And that's what we're using as our evidence, if you like, to start targeting the columns that have got the shortest period of time before retest, because they're the ones that are closest to failure, we think.
Amanda, do you want to come back?
I think it's just making sure that we're confident that the budget that's been set is going to meet those lampposts that are most at risk. Because, for us as councillors, the second something fails, then it's like, oh, was this in place? Are we confident? Did we do the right thing? All those kind of things, obviously, then go through your thought processes. So I suppose for me, it was getting assurance that the testing programme is meaning that we are replacing them as quickly as we can, but as quickly as safe from a safety point of view, they're being done as quickly as possible. That's the sort of concern I had. Thank you.
Yeah, Archie, did you want to come in?
Yes, Chair, if you don't mind. I'd just like to reassure Amanda and the committee that Chris and the team are really doing a good job in relation to testing the structures that we do have, and where we do find that there's any problems, we replace them urgently. And we've also saved money as well by having in-house teams and not using Western Power for connections. So, we are making gains, but we are limited. And I think councils have got to understand we are limited to the funds that we've got, being the way that we're being funded. I mean, the city is great. It can turn the lights on, but it's awash with money from the government, where we are not, unfortunately. But the one thing that our officers do make sure, and Chris and his team are excellent at making sure that the standards that we have are kept, and though the ones that are dangerous will be taken down and replaced, as you said.
Thank you, Ozzy. Mr. Bill.
Yeah, and I think this has been a very useful report, well presented, and it's the exchange of views and answers has been very instructive. I was looking at the report which said that the columns of 30 years ago are now suspect. Well, I was sitting here 30 years ago when they were all brand new. So it just gives you sort of an indication of time, where everything you put together, everything which you think is right at the time, and of course you don't realise that you were 30 years ago we were solving the problems of the previous period, and so it goes on like painting the fourth bridge. One aspect that hasn't been picked up is the safety one, and we were reassured this morning by the officers that if in fact there is a situation where the police recognise that turning off the lights is causing a problem, there is sufficient flexibility in the system, providing the police are themselves satisfied that putting the lights back on would help. That process is in place. So I think that was reassuring. Could I just touch on I mean, we've concentrated in this report on the capital costs, and that is serious, and that's got to be addressed. But could we just think in terms about the revenue? What we're hearing all the time, of course, is that energy costs are now getting out of hand, and we're hearing on the news all the time the cost to the domestic user and the cost to the industrial user. Though the lunchtime news was highlighting this. I'm just wondering whether county councils as a whole should be joining in on the general lobby to try to ensure that if there's going to be a protection or a protection of costs to other users, then that we need to bring to the fore the fact that the street lights could be at risk if the funding is not there to keep the street lights on. And it's a serious matter, and I don't think people think in terms of the fact that the lights outside their houses and their streets could be at risk. But if things get out of hand, then it should be to the forefront in people's minds. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Mr. Bill. I think Chris has explained that in paragraph 45, page 15. But Chris, Ron, is there anything else you wish to add to that?
Chair, I mean, I would just say that, I mean, I wouldn't disagree. However, I think, you know, the issue is much, much wider, and local government, I'm sure, are lobbying on many fronts across. It's not just street lighting, it's across the board where we're going to be extremely challenged in delivering services that we currently deliver. And I'm well aware that this authority is very engaged in lobbying government in terms of funding to it.
On the matter of the sorry, Chair.
No, come on, Chris.
Yeah, on the matter of the energy tariff, I think we can take some assurance that ESPO, you'll be aware of those, they are working on behalf of many counties collectively, so their buying power, I would imagine, will be quite high, and therefore I would imagine they're getting good rates. I'm speaking from the outside, but that would seem to be the logical way, the way that ESPO will work, as they do with lots of other things. So I think we can be assured, because we're not buying as a single county, only buying 9 million kilowatts of energy. They'll be buying hundreds of thousands, I think, across the piece and getting a better rate, but the challenge is still there.
Mr. Fillmore.
Thank you, Chair. I don't know whether it's Anne or Chris or both. It's a question. So since park night lighting, you as the officers will have learnt a lot about the impact on road users, feedback from the police, and. And now we've just had COVID, where there's been a fundamental shift in work-life balance behaviours. And I just wonder if there's an opportunity to actually re-look at when we actually turn the lights on and when we turn them off, based on those very clear societal shifts. You know, I'm old enough, sadly, to remember, you know, the guide that says you turn your car headlights on when the street lights come on. And I just wonder if there's an opportunity with all these recent societal shifts and what you have learned through park night lighting, is there an opportunity to actually turn the lights on later and off earlier, just to a bit of extra savings? Thank you, Chair.
I think under the, you know, where we're going forward and some of our financial challenges, will certainly be street lighting will be looked at as to how we can trim and dim more, when we need to have them on and off, how, you know, the percentages. You know, at the moment we've got 56% park night lighting. If we could increase that, we'll certainly be looking at a whole load of options around that.
Thank you.
Can I add then that the Carbon Reduction Programme Board is looking at a number of initiatives that we put forward around the lighting options. Obviously, we're very aware of the sensitivities around when the lights are on and off, but we've done scenarios where we switch the lights off at 11:30 or 11 o'clock, so switching off earlier, and then not putting them back on until 6 a.m. in the morning. And we've looked at potential savings and the cost benefits and carbon savings of all that. I haven't got the figures here to hand, but we presented that to the Carbon Board maybe 2 weeks ago, something like that. So some of that work has been done. To answer your question, the decision around changing strategy or policy, however you want to call it, won't be one for me. It'll be one for you guys, I think, because you'll notice your post box will no doubt increase if people find the lights are off earlier or for longer periods. And we've thrown that into the mix. We've been looking at the MTF savings and throwing every thought we have into there and trying to provide some information around the benefits of that, and the disbenefits, of course, are around public perception and post bag and all that business there.
Thank you, Chris and Anne. There are no other questions. Ozzy, is there anything you'd like to add?
No, I think everything has been said, and Chris has portrayed the report very well. And I'd just like to thank Chris and his team for the work that they do on behalf of the County Council.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ozzy. I'm going to move on now then to item 9, which is the Highways and Transport Performance Report to June 22. Anne, please.
Thank you, Chair. This is the regular performance update that you receive at this committee, and it's up to the quarter to June this year. Okay, so that's the period we're looking at. 7 indicators have been updated this time because obviously they don't get updated every quarter. Some are annual indicators, etc. So there's just 7. So I'll focus on those. Happy to take questions on the whole lot of indicators, but I'll just focus on those. I just always like to refer you to the dashboard, but look at the report if you want, but I always find that quite easy to digest it from. Okay, for the ones that have been updated, 2 have seen an improvement, but 5 have declined. So we start with the strong economy, transport and infrastructure outcome. The indicators under those are both bus related, and they've both declined, unfortunately. The first one is the local bus passenger journeys originating in the authority area, and that has that's improved slightly to hadn't declined, it improved slightly by 13% to 7 million journeys. However, I would just put that in a context for you. Pre the pandemic, that number was always between 12 and 13 million. So it's just over half of pre-pandemic numbers, which I think, and I'm sure members are very aware, we're seeing some bus service withdrawals at the moment, etc. Kind of then reflects where the bus market is and what a difficult time they're having. Despite traffic levels having got back to pre-COVID levels, bus patronage certainly hasn't. Similar picture for the park and ride, where the indicator is significantly below the pre-pandemic level. And for this quarter, we've seen a drop to just under 114,000 trips. The kind of pre-pandemic level number was around about 190,000 trips. Okay, so again, significantly down. So the confidence hasn't quite come back in terms of bus usage. I think would be my observation there. If we move on to the safe and well outcome, we're a top performing authority on the road safety indicators, but despite that, unfortunately, we've seen 4 indicators decline in performance in this period. Those are the total number of casualties that has gone up from 911 to 978, and also as well, unfortunately, the killed and seriously injured. That is again gone up as well. That's gone up from 213 to 249. If we look at the casualties involving walking, cycling and motorcyclists, they've increased from 256 to 275, and those in those groups, those usual groups on the killed and seriously injured, again, that's risen as well from 103 to 121. I think in some ways you could reflect traffic has gone up more. We had a lot more cycling, walking during the pandemic. We may have seen, you know, those kind of higher levels being maintained, and yet we've got higher traffic levels as well. So some of those, you know, ongoing increases in those areas might have factors. I mean, I think as you will know from the road safety reports we bring to you on an annual basis, is you've got to look at the longer term trends on this. So we will carefully look at this and what we think might be behind it. While these numbers have all risen, we will need to, you know, have that longer term look. And overall, I think we're seeing the trend in total casualties has gone down. However, the trend in severity, i.e. the killed and seriously injured, has not gone down during the time period. If we look back 10 years, we used to look at the average from 2010 to 2014. Total casualties are way down. However, the numbers of killed and seriously injured are, you know, they're round about the same, up and down a bit. They've not gone down over that period. We will continue, you know, you get the reports here annually. We'll continue the work through the Leicestershire and Rutland Road Safety Partnership and the work we do ourselves on road safety, things like the Rural Roads Initiative, where we're lowering speed limits from the national 60 down to 50s. What else have we got? We've got our young driver education. We've got our driver education workshops. We've got traffic management schemes, various traffic management schemes we put in, etc. We will continue with all that, and we'll continue to look at the stats that are coming in to see what other targeted things we could be doing on these. The thing I will finish on in that, however, is we are a top performing. We're in the top quartile for road safety against comparative local authorities. So while the trends, unfortunately, are not going the way we'd want to, we're still a lot better than the majority of authorities. However, you know, we can't take the foot off the pedal. Sorry about the pun. You know, we'll continue with that work. The last indicator that's been updated is the one under the clean and green outcome, and that's carbon emissions from transport, and that has seen a relatively significant reduction from round about 1,200 kilotons to just over 1,000 kilotons, and it puts us in the second quartile. I'm going to caveat that. That's the data. It's data 2 years in arrears because it's national data. So that takes us to 2020. We had lockdowns in 2020 and loads less traffic. So we're going to have to look at the trend on that one again. So while it's good news and we'll take it, less emissions, you know, we're going to have to look at the longer trend on this as well. That's the bits I wanted to pull out, but happy to take questions, Chair, on any of the indicators.
Thank you, Anne. I've got Mr. Halland.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thanks, Anne. Just coming back to paragraphs 22 and 23, which is the killed and injured excluding cars. Would it be possible to have a bit more of a sort of in-depth breakdown on that between the different groups, so pedestrians and cyclists and then motorcyclists? So it'd be useful potentially to know if there's a particular group where we have an issue, because the actual means or methods that we might have to put in place to try and address those will be different for each of those groups. So it might just be useful to have an indication if there's a particular issue. Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, more than happy to share that. We bring all that in the annual reports. I don't know if you want it again. I get the monthly, we do monthly stats, you know, with what we get. So it's a rolling 12-month thing. And that gives us the breakdown on all the, you know, individually, you know, motorists, cyclists, pedestrians, car passengers, etc. So we do have that, and I get that on a monthly basis. I'm more than happy to circulate the latest one if you would like, or you get all the details in the annual one. Okay, no, I can certainly.
Furthermore, you indicated.
Thank you, Chair. One's just a comment, really. There was some commentary some time ago as we were in and coming out of COVID lockdowns that actually a lot of these casualties and the high speed impacts were actually people driving a lot faster because the roads were clearer. And I'm guessing some of that's actually feeding into these statistics, whereas people might not quite have learnt to slow down again. Question I do have, and forgive me if I've missed it in the report, is the evidence and the statistics, do they cover the footways as well, or is it just the physical road?
No, it could be, you know, it could
So
be.
it's the highway.
It is the highway, so that includes footways, yes.
Yeah, so for me then, so my question, Councillor Price, is do we have anything about e-scooters? There was a report in LGIU probably 3-4 months ago, and it's quite clearly said there were now more incidents involving e-scooters than there were motorcycle and cyclists put together. So I do think we they're the back, we're all councillors, they're bone of our lives. I just wonder if we actually did need to actually have a handle on what are the impacts of e-scooters, because they seem to be growing exponentially in numbers at the minute. So I do think we need to keep a very close focus on it. Thank you, Chair. Anne?
It should do. If there's been any incidents that have caused an injury, that should be recorded through the police system, so it should do. But I would remind members that, you know, they will be aware that it's illegal to have an e-scooter on any public highway anywhere out with the test cities. We are not a test area. Nottingham is, so you'll see them. That's legal because that's a trial with DFT. I absolutely, before I can see you jumping in, I get that. You know, not everybody's in complying with the law at the moment. I absolutely get that. But, you know, and it's something that DFT, I understand, are accelerating legislation that gives the rules and regs around how we manage e-scooters, because as you're quite rightly saying, you know, it's a fairly, it brings up with it a whole host of different challenges, doesn't it? Managing it safely on the highway, should be on the road. If they're on the footway, which they are at the moment, how do you manage that when it's people at speed and you've got pedestrians not looking? You know, there's a whole host of issues. Who's responsible? Where's the liability lie? Those kind of things. So DFT apparently are accelerating legislation so that they can allow this to happen based on what's coming out of the trial cities. At the moment, we shouldn't have incidents of them in our area. It doesn't mean there won't be. If it involves an injury, it should get recorded through the police system, so it should be coming up. Pleased to say I do get, I see all the individual fatality reports, and I haven't seen anything involving an e-scooter, thank goodness. But it doesn't mean there's been other lesser severity incidents. And yes, it's going to get more and more common. So we do need all that legislation in place to help guide us all and how we manage it.
Les, you wanted to come back?
I sort of, subconscious, my favourite 2 words that I hear from the police are Section 59 and it's been seized. We know they're illegal. We clearly have a legislative issue where, technology is moving faster than the government can legislate. I'm just curious as to, okay, if we're not having fatalities, that's great, but the reality is we have e-scooters on our footways that are capable of doing 30 miles an hour. If you were on a moped, you would have to be taxed, insured, safety helmet, and. So we do have a major shortfall in our legislation at that. So I'm just curious or conscious that we perhaps need a handle particularly on e-scooters, because that's the big growth area. And we do know, according to LGIU anyway, that this incident rate is growing quite rapidly. So just future thinking, really, Chair. Thank you, Anne.
Thank you, Mrs. Ack.
Thank you, Chair. I just have to agree with Les. It's certainly within our community, the amount of e-scooters on the road has really started to increase, and most of the individuals are under 16, and they certainly go crackers on them, but they're quicker than my electric bike, much quicker, and it's the danger, etc. I completely agree. I was also really interested in the difference between walking, cycling, and motorcyclists in terms of how that splits out. Because you're completely right, what we might do with each of those groups would be very, very different. So understanding the detail behind that would be really useful. I suppose just following on from Les's point about pavement, highway, cycleway, I think it'd be really interesting to understand about how what injuries are happening at which mode of transport on which part of the highway, because that for me would be a good case to maybe look at more dedicated cycle routes. I think Ratby Lane being probably the most frightening road to go on if you're on a bike. Actually, it's not that great if you want to walk, but it's used fairly regularly. So I think, you know, these things are really useful in terms of understanding the highway. My interest though was the local bus journeys, and I didn't know whether or not this also included the demand responsive transport, the new bus services that are now been released in the FOSS villages, or is it just passenger vehicles? You say we've gone from 7 million, it was 11 million before the pandemic. Quite a lot has switched to different kinds of services. So will those be in the figures going forward? And then on the park and ride, the period that's in there, that was actually when the schools went back into lockdown, was Q4 of 2011, 2021, 20.
My understanding is the DRT is included in the passenger figures. I will double check that though, but that was my understanding. So I'll double check that I'm correct in saying that to you. In terms of the park and ride, I don't know if I would say it's too early to be worried, because I just think it's concerning overall. I take your point about that page and, you know, the impact on the figures there, but I just think we've had a reasonable period since coming out the main element of the pandemic, haven't we? And it's been very, very slow to see an upturn when you look at it in comparison to the amount of traffic movements that are happening out there. So yeah, I take your caveat on that bit, but I still think that there's a general concern overall about the willingness to use public transport, the buses, etc.
Thank you for presenting that report, and I've got no more questions. Ozzy, is there anything you'd like to add?
Well, no, I look at the buses at the present time, and certainly around my area, and when I go across, to other areas, it's the usage. There's just hardly anybody using the buses, and I can see sometimes going around my village, there's nobody on it. So we've got to try and get that message across. If we don't use these buses, we're going to lose them, and that really is concerning to us. But no, e-scooters, I agree with Les that they are becoming a problem, but it's a police enforcement. There's not a lot that the county council can do. We can record injuries and whatever, but the police really, it's there in their domain. And what we need to see is government now legislating sooner rather than later, because the other aspect is there's not enough police to go around to actually deal with all these things, but they do seize them. I do know they do seize them, that's a good thing. But as the casualty rates go up, I think we've come to a position now. I've certainly noticed it during the lockdown that there are people were speeding a lot. Now we've got more traffic on the roads. I think those people that were speeding need to take the foot off the gas, because I still think that's what's causing a lot of the problems. They were used to driving in a different way during lockdown. The roads were quiet. In fact, in places they were absolutely dead. And now we've got back commuters on the road, and people are still travelling at silly speeds. But we do everything working with the Road Safety Partnership as a team to actually try and reduce casualties across the roads in Leicestershire. And I'd like to thank the Road Safety team, our officers, the police, and all the team that are part of that try to get that message across and protect the residents of Leicestershire. The police also do with the fire service the Fatal 4, which is brilliant, and certainly I'm sure a lot of the councillors in this room have experienced they're doing that across their areas, and they continue to do that as part of the road safety team. So a good thanks to all the team that try to reduce the casualties, but it's something we all need to work on.
Thank you for that, Ozzy. I'm going to move on now to item 10, which is dates of future meetings, which are listed in the agenda. We're okay with that, no doubt. And then finally, item 11, any other items which the chairman has decided to take as urgent. There isn't any. As I stated earlier, there's no urgent items, so I'll draw this meeting to a close and thank you for your attendance. Thank you.